Mom said, "We raised you better," while asking for another loan, but what she didn't know was that this time, I wasn't the same daughter she thought she controlled. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Tess, and I've spent most of my adult life helping my parents, Marla and Clint. I work long shifts as a paramedic, and whenever they needed money, I was the one they called. They always said things like, "You're the responsible one," which really meant, "You're the one who will pay." I believed them for years because I thought helping family was the right thing to do. The truth hit me the day I found out that the $12,000 I lent them for medical bills was actually used for a sunny trip to Arizona with my brother Vern. When I confronted them, they acted like it was nothing. That hurt more than losing the money. I tried to set boundaries. I told them I needed to save for my own place, but they called me selfish. Then one night, Mom called crying about their mortgage. When I hesitated, she dropped the line that cut deep, "We raised you better." Something inside me snapped. Later, my other brother Cale slipped up and told me there was no mortgage problem at all. They wanted the money to help Vern buy a new truck. That was the moment I decided I was done. I gathered every receipt and message, and at a family dinner, I showed them everything. I told them I would never give them another dollar. They were shocked, angry, defensive, but I finally felt free. And for the first time, I chose myself. Growing up, Tess learned early that her place in the family was different from her brothers, Vern and Cale. Whenever something went wrong in the house, eyes turned to her. If homework was missing, if a bill was late, if someone needed a ride, the answer was always the same: "Tess can handle it." Her parents said it with pride, but there was weight behind it, a quiet expectation that she would carry whatever they didn't want to deal with. Vern was the golden child. He only had to show up to be celebrated. If he brought home average grades, there was cheering. When he skipped chores, the explanation was that he was busy or tired. Cale wasn't much different. If he messed up, someone quickly excused it as just a phase. Their mistakes were brushed away like dust on a counter. But when Tess succeeded, the reaction wasn't joy. It was a push for more. If she earned an award, her parents reminded her to stay humble. If she worked extra hours, they hinted that the family could use a little help. She learned to smile while swallowing the small ache of being overlooked. Little by little, Tessa's savings disappeared in small requests: gas money here, grocery money there, a little temporary help that never returned. Her parents acted like it was natural for her to open her wallet, as if supporting them was part of her identity. They didn't ask Vern or Cale, they never even suggested it. Instead, they leaned on Tess with an easy confidence, like she existed to steady everyone but herself. She stayed quiet, telling herself it was normal, that families leaned on one another. But even she could feel something shifting inside as the years went on. She started to notice how often they clapped for her brothers while turning to her only when they needed something solved. And that quiet ache slowly grew into something sharper. Tess still remembers the night her parents called sounding desperate. Marla spoke in a shaky voice, saying they were overwhelmed by sudden health expenses. Clint added that they didn't know who else to turn to. Hearing fear in their voices pushed every protective instinct forward, so Tess agreed to help without hesitation. She wired $12,000, telling herself she was doing the right thing, even though the number made her stomach twist. Weeks passed, and her parents never mentioned follow-up appointments or test results. Whenever she gently asked how things were going, they changed the subject. She didn't push, thinking they were simply tired or embarrassed. She tried to trust them the way she always had. One afternoon, while visiting their house, she noticed a stack of papers sticking out from a kitchen drawer. A bright photo caught her eye: sunny skies, cactus silhouettes, hotel logos. Curiosity turned to confusion as she looked closer. Airline confirmations, tour tickets, restaurant bills, all dated right after she sent the money. And every receipt listed Vern as part of the group. Her chest tightened as understanding settled in. There was no treatment. No doctor visits. No emergency. They had taken the money she worked endless shifts to earn and spent it on a getaway with the son they adored above anyone else. When she finally brought it up, hoping for at least an apology, they laughed softly like she was being dramatic. Marla said the trip was needed for bonding. Clint added that she should be happy they got some family time. Hearing that made Tess feel small, like her effort and sacrifice meant nothing. It was the first moment she felt something inside her crack. The trust she held so tightly slipped through her fingers, leaving a sting she couldn't ignore anymore. After uncovering how her money had been used, Tess felt something shift. She didn't explode or argue. Instead, she went home and sat in silence, thinking about what she wanted her life to look like. For the first time, she pictured a space that belonged only to her, a small condo with quiet mornings, a place where she didn't have to worry about anyone knocking on her door with another problem. That picture stayed with her, steady and bright. The next weekend, she visited her parents determined to speak clearly. She told them she needed to focus on building her own life, that she'd been looking at places to buy, and she needed to hold on to every dollar she could. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. Saying the words out loud felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Marla crossed her arms immediately. Clint didn't look at her at all. They exchanged looks she knew too well, silent conversations filled with judgment. Instead of listening, they made little comments under their breath. Marla muttered something about how young people only cared about themselves now. Clint added that in their day, children understood duty. Every remark felt like a nudge meant to push her back into the role they preferred. Tess stayed calm, repeating that she wasn't able to help financially anymore. They didn't argue directly, but the disappointment in the room felt heavy. They hinted that her plans were unrealistic, that buying a place alone was too much responsibility. They acted as though her dreams were inconveniences rather than goals. Leaving the house that day, Tess felt both guilty and strangely lighter. She wasn't used to choosing herself, and the newness of it scared her. But underneath the nerves was a small, steady sense of strength, proof that she could set limits, even when it made others uncomfortable. Tess was getting ready for bed when her phone lit up. Seeing her mother's name that late made her pause. She answered, expecting something small, but Marla's voice came through tense and urgent. She said the house payment was overdue and they didn't know how to keep things afloat. The story came fast, heavy, and dramatic, as if every minute counted. Tess listened quietly, feeling her shoulders tighten. She didn't respond right away, unsure if she could trust what she was hearing. After the last incident, she told herself she'd think carefully before giving anything again. The silence on her end must have annoyed Marla, because her tone suddenly sharpened. "You're really going to leave us struggling like this?" she asked. Tess tried to explain she wasn't in a position to step in, that she needed time to think, but her mother cut her off. Then came the line Tess knew too well, slow, sharp, and meant to hurt. "We raised you better than this." The words landed like a punch. They weren't loud, but they carried years of pressure behind them. Tess felt her chest tighten as memories rushed back, early mornings spent working extra hours, skipped outings, savings drained one request at a time. She remembered every time she'd stepped in without hesitation. She remembered trusting their stories, trusting their need, trusting their love. Hearing that sentence, after everything she had already given, made her stomach twist. It was as if none of her sacrifices counted, as if the moment she stopped handing over money, she became a disappointment. She could hear the expectation woven into every pause, every sigh from her mother. Tess didn't argue. She simply said she couldn't talk anymore and ended the call. Sitting alone in the dim room, she realized the pain she felt wasn't just from the request, it was from understanding exactly how little her effort had ever mattered to them. A few days after that tense call, Tess stopped by Cale's place to drop off some gear he had left in her car. She didn't plan on talking about anything serious, but Cale was in a chatty mood. He mentioned their parents in passing, saying they were excited about something coming up. Tess didn't think much of it until he made an offhand comment while grabbing a drink from the fridge. He said Vern had finally picked out the truck he wanted and that Marla and Clint were trying to figure out how much they could contribute toward the initial payment. Cale spoke casually, like it was old news. He didn't notice how still Tess went, how she suddenly stopped breathing for a second. She asked him what he meant, trying to keep her voice steady. Cale continued without hesitation, explaining that their parents were determined to help Vern get the model he had been talking about for months. He added that they were trying to shift money around to make it work. The words sank into Tess with a cold clarity. There was no house crisis. No emergency. No danger of losing anything. Everything she had been told during that late-night call was just a story designed to push her into opening her wallet again. Cale finally looked at her and seemed confused by her expression. When she asked if their parents were having any trouble with bills, he laughed lightly and said they were doing fine, better than usual, actually. He even mentioned they had been talking about taking another short trip later in the year. Tess felt a slow, steady anger rise inside her, not explosive but deep and certain. The pieces lined up too neatly. The urgency. The guilt. The familiar pressure. She saw the pattern clearly now. They hadn't needed her help. They simply wanted more to give to Vern. And this time, she didn't feel guilty for seeing the truth. Tess drove to her parents' place with a calm she didn't fully feel. She didn't raise her voice when she stepped inside. She simply asked Marla why she had said the house was in trouble when they were actually preparing to support Vern's new purchase. The question hung in the air, steady and direct. Marla didn't look embarrassed or even surprised. Instead, she let out a long sigh, the kind she used when she wanted to make someone feel unreasonable. She said Tess was overreacting, that she always took things too seriously. The word dramatic slipped out like it was nothing, as if Tess had imagined the whole late-night phone call. Tess tried again, asking why they hadn't been honest. Marla waved her hand and said Tess was focusing on the wrong thing. She reminded her that families step in for each other and that Tess knew that better than anyone. The statement stung, not because it was true, but because it was twisted into another excuse. When Tess said she couldn't keep giving money, Marla's expression tightened. She told Tess she worked more hours than her brothers, so she should be able to put in a little extra. She even said that if Tess picked up additional shifts, the issue would solve itself. It was spoken so casually, as though Tess's exhaustion and life didn't matter. Hearing that made something inside Tess settle rather than spark. She realized her mother didn't see her effort, sacrifice, or limits. She only saw a resource. A convenient solution. A guaranteed yes. Clint barely looked up from the kitchen table, offering no support, no acknowledgement. That silence confirmed everything Tess feared. Tess didn't shout or cry. She simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment press into her until it became solid. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't confusion. It was a clear choice they kept making, every single time. And for the first time, she understood she didn't have to keep accepting it. Tess left the house with her emotions pressed down tight, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. On the drive home, she stared at the road and made a quiet decision. If her parents wanted to treat her like someone who existed only to serve their needs, then she would let them think everything was normal, for a little while. She told herself not to act shocked or upset. She would simply say she needed time to consider their request. The next morning, she sent a short message saying she was looking into things. Marla responded with a cheerful reply, already assuming Tess would cave like always. That reaction confirmed to Tess that she had made the right choice. She pulled out an old shoebox from her closet where she had tossed random papers over the years. Inside were bank statements, printed messages, and notes she'd kept without thinking too hard about them at the time. Now she laid everything out on the floor, sorting through every moment she had stepped in. Transfers for rent, grocery runs she had covered, sudden emergencies that appeared only when it was convenient for them. She found dates, amounts, and short explanations she had written to keep track of her budget. Those little reminders now formed a clear timeline. She scrolled through her phone, saving conversations where they had pressed her for help. She took screenshots and stored them carefully, labeling each one so she wouldn't get confused later. Every piece made the picture sharper. There were no accidents, no misunderstandings, just a long pattern she had never wanted to admit. This wasn't to shame them or involve anyone else. That wasn't who she was. She just wanted something they couldn't dodge or dismiss, something that would force them to face the truth they always twisted. For once, she would meet them fully prepared. Tess chose a simple evening for the gathering, nothing special, just her small apartment, a few dishes on the table, and seats arranged so she could see each face clearly. When her family arrived, they came in chatting, unaware of what she was about to do. She greeted them politely, keeping her voice steady, letting them settle before she spoke. Once everyone quieted, Tess reached for the folder she had placed beside her chair. She opened it slowly, pulling out the first page. Without raising her tone, she began explaining each entry, dates, amounts, reasons she had been given, and what had actually happened. She moved from one paper to the next, the stack forming a line across the table. Her brothers shifted uneasily as the pattern became impossible to ignore. Vern looked down when she mentioned the trips and purchases tied to funds she had provided. Cale kept glancing between their parents, unsure how to react. Marla tried to cut in, insisting that Tess was misunderstanding, that she was blowing things out of proportion. Tess didn't let the interruption throw her off. She simply lifted her hand slightly, signaling she wasn't finished. For the first time, Marla fell silent at that gesture. Tess continued, laying out messages she had printed, showing promises that were never kept, explanations that changed whenever it suited them. She spoke with a clarity she hadn't used with them before, not emotional, not accusatory, just factual. Clint's face tightened, but he said nothing. Vern finally muttered that they hadn't meant harm, but his voice faded under the weight of the evidence. Tess ended by saying she needed them to see exactly what she had carried for years. She didn't shout or tear up. She simply held her ground, letting the truth sit heavy in the room. For the first time in her life, the conversation was hers. After laying out every detail, Tess took a deep breath and spoke clearly, without hesitation. "I'm done giving money," she said. "No more loans, no more bailing anyone out, no more being pressured or guilt. I need to take care of myself from now on." The words felt heavy in the room, final, and unshakable. Marla froze, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Clint's jaw tightened, and Vern and Cale exchanged uneasy glances. Tess held their eyes steadily, refusing to back down. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for weeks, and now that it was here, she felt an unfamiliar calm, a quiet strength that didn't need validation. Marla's voice cracked, trembling with anger and hurt. "You're being selfish, ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us?" Tess didn't respond. She let her mother's words hang in the air, letting the truth of her decision sink in. She wasn't rejecting her family emotionally, just financially, and it was the boundary she needed to survive. Clint opened his mouth to argue, but Tess shook her head slightly, silently signaling that no debate would change her mind. Vern tried to plead, mentioning the truck again, but Tess reminded him gently that it was no longer her responsibility. Even Cale, usually neutral, looked shocked at how firm she had become. The room felt heavier than it ever had before, but Tess noticed something in herself she hadn't realized existed, a sense of relief, of finally breathing without carrying the weight of their manipulation. She had expected resistance, perhaps anger, maybe even tears, but she had not expected the freedom that came with saying enough. For the first time, Tess knew she was standing for herself, fully and without compromise, and nothing they said could take that away. The day after the dinner, Tessa's phone started buzzing with messages she hadn't expected. Marla had reached out to a few aunts and uncles, trying to explain how Tess had turned against the family and suggesting they intervene. Tess read their replies carefully, seeing the mix of concern and curiosity. She didn't want arguments or debates. She wanted boundaries. Instead of engaging, she typed a short message to the group chat, calm and firm, "I'm done being used." She hit send without hesitation, feeling a weight lift immediately. It was simple, but it carried everything she needed them to know. There was no anger, no guilt, no explanation, just the truth. Responses trickled in, some shocked, some defensive. A few of her cousins quietly admitted they had always noticed how her parents treated her differently, how they leaned on her while letting her brothers slide. They confessed in hushed texts that they had felt the same pressure in their own ways but never had the courage to confront it. Tess read each one, surprised by the quiet solidarity forming around her decision. Even distant relatives who had never been close sent words of support, acknowledging that she had finally set the boundary everyone else had been too afraid to enforce. It was unexpected, the validation, but it reinforced what she already knew: standing up for herself wasn't betrayal, it was survival. For the first time, Tess didn't feel isolated. She saw that her parents' manipulation wasn't invisible, that others had recognized it but had stayed silent. And now, by simply stating her truth, she had made a ripple that quietly reshaped the family dynamic in her favor. She felt lighter, stronger, and certain that her choice was the right one. With the last of the tension behind her, Tess turned her attention to something she had dreamed about for years: a place of her own. She found a small condo in a quiet neighborhood, a space that felt like a fresh start. The moment she signed the papers, a rush of relief swept over her, as if every tight knot of stress and obligation she had carried for so long had finally loosened. She filled the room slowly, choosing items that reflected her taste, her personality, her independence. A soft rug in the living room, framed prints that made her smile, a tiny bookshelf with novels she had been collecting but never displayed, each choice felt like a small declaration that this space belonged entirely to her. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about sudden calls or urgent requests. She cooked what she wanted, played music she loved, and sat by the window watching the city go by without needing to solve anyone else's problem. The freedom was subtle, almost quiet, but it rang louder than any confrontation ever could. Her revenge wasn't about confrontation or proving them wrong with words. It was in the simple act of living fully, independently, and without fear. Every morning she woke up and realized that her life was finally hers to shape. Tess felt herself growing, not just financially or practically, but emotionally. She no longer measured her worth by how much she could give others. She learned that setting boundaries and standing firm didn't make her cruel, it made her whole. In that quiet condo, surrounded by things she loved and a life she had earned, Tess discovered that the truest revenge wasn't loud, it was freedom. Sitting in her new home, Tess often thought about everything she had endured. The hardest part wasn't losing money or being manipulated, it was realizing that the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally had used that love to control her. That kind of betrayal cut deeper than anything else, leaving a quiet ache she carried for years. Yet, through the pain, she learned something important: protecting herself didn't make her selfish or cruel. It was necessary. Drawing clear lines, refusing to be exploited, and standing firm were acts of survival, not vengeance. The freedom she felt now was proof of what boundaries could do, how they could heal even the most exhausting patterns of manipulation. Tess wanted anyone listening to understand that recognizing the difference between love and control is difficult but essential. Sometimes the people closest to us can unintentionally, or intentionally, use our loyalty against us. She hoped that by sharing her experience, others could see the signs before it's too late, could trust their instincts, and could find the courage to step back when needed. Her story wasn't meant to shame anyone. It was meant to give permission to anyone who had felt trapped by family expectations, guilt, or obligation, to put themselves first without feeling wrong. Tess knew how terrifying it could feel to say no to the people who raised you, but she also knew how liberating it was when she finally did. Looking around her condo, she felt a quiet pride. Every choice, every boundary, every moment of courage had brought her here. And in that calm, she hoped her journey would remind someone else that walking away from manipulation doesn't break love, it honors it in the healthiest way possible. Hey besties! Thanks for sticking with me through Tess's story. She spent years giving, trusting, and sacrificing for her family, only to face lies and manipulation. But through the pain, she found strength, drew boundaries, and built a life that belongs entirely to her. Remember, protecting yourself isn't cruel, it's necessary. If this story resonated, like, share, comment, and subscribe for more real-life journeys of courage and growth.